October 12, 1944, Luftwaffe Intelligence Headquarters, Berlin. Major Heinrich Müller stared at the reconnaissance photograph spread across his desk and felt his jaw tighten. The aircraft was unmistakable. A P-51D Mustang, identification number visible through the telephoto lens, 44-on-761. The same number that appeared on the wreckage report from 6 weeks ago. The same tail number that belonged to a pilot whose death certificate sat in the filing cabinet 3 meters from Miller's chair. He looked down at the incident report dated August 28th. American fighter pilot shot down over Belgium. Aircraft observed crashing in flames near Malmedy. No parachute sighted. Presumed killed in action. The Abwehr had confirmed it. Luftwaffe observers had watched the Mustang spiral into the forest, trailing smoke. The Americans themselves had transmitted condolence messages, intercepted by German listening posts. But reconnaissance taken 4 days ago showed that same tail number leading a fighter sweep over Munich. Yesterday it appeared again, strafing a supply convoy near Stuttgart. This morning the Gestapo forwarded a report from an informant in France. The pilot was asking questions about airfield locations, gathering intelligence, planning strikes. Miller reached for the red folder reserved for high-priority targets. Inside were photographs of Allied pilots, considered most dangerous to the Reich. He pulled a blank threat assessment form, name, unknown, American presumably, status, officially deceased according to U.S. records, current activity, active operations behind enemy lines, threat level, extreme. He didn't know yet how an American fighter pilot had survived that crash. He didn't know how the man had acquired a new aircraft with his old identification. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever this pilot was, he'd just become the most wanted man in occupied Europe. For 8 months, Allied fighter pilots had been pushing deeper into German-controlled territory. Operation Overlord had succeeded. Allied forces were advancing across France and Belgium, but the Luftwaffe, though weakened, remained lethal. Experienced German pilots still commanded respect and fear among Allied airmen who'd seen too many friends go down. The P-51D Mustang had changed the equation. With its Packard Voux 1657 engine producing 1,490 horsepower, the Mustang could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. Its .650 caliber Browning M2 machine guns delivered devastating firepower, but the aircraft's greatest advantage was range. With drop tanks, a Mustang could fly 1,150 miles. No other Allied fighter could match it. By autumn 1944, the strategic situation had reached a critical juncture. Germany was losing the air war, but slowly. Every day, Luftwaffe fighters rose to challenge American bombers. Every day, more B-17s fell burning from the sky. Intelligence became as valuable as ammunition. Knowing where the Germans kept their aircraft, where they stored fuel, how they moved supplies, this information saved lives. The statistics backed up the desperation. Between June and October 1944, the 8th Air Force lost 1,398 aircraft over occupied Europe. That translated to nearly 14,000 airmen killed, captured, or missing. When a pilot went down behind enemy lines, doctrine was clear: evade, reach the underground resistance, get to Spain or Switzerland, return to England, resume flying. Most pilots who survived being shot down never flew combat again. The psychological toll was immense. Some spent months in POW camps. Others died trying to escape. The few who made it back typically received reassignment to training duties or stateside positions. Combat fatigue. That's what the doctors called it. The military understood. No shame in it. But some pilots refused to quit. Records from the Air Force's Escape and Evasion Society document extraordinary cases. Pilots who walked hundreds of miles through occupied territory. Airmen who lived in barns, ate scraps, learned enough French or Dutch to pass through checkpoints. The best evaders possessed three qualities. First, initiative, the ability to make decisions without orders. Second, adaptability, shifting plans when circumstances changed. Third, absolute determination to return to the fight. Intelligence officers recognized the value these men represented. A pilot who'd evaded capture had seen German dispositions firsthand. He knew which roads carried traffic, which bridges remained intact, where anti-aircraft batteries clustered. Debriefing reports from returned evaders filled filing cabinets at 8th Air Force headquarters. What made this particular case unprecedented was the flying. Pilots who evaded typically spent weeks moving through underground networks, passed from safe house to safe house, eventually crossing into neutral territory. They didn't continue flying combat operations. They didn't steal aircraft. They didn't maintain their original tail numbers while conducting unauthorized missions deep in enemy territory. The Luftwaffe kept detailed records. German intelligence officers tracked Allied aircraft through a combination of visual observation, radar tracking, and radio intercepts. When an American fighter went down, German units filed reports. Crash investigators examined wreckage. If they found a body, they documented it. The bureaucracy was meticulous. This created a problem. How do you hunt a man who's officially dead? How do you warn your pilots about a threat that doesn't exist according to every official record? The German High Command faced an impossible question. Either their crash reports were wrong, which meant their entire intelligence apparatus was unreliable, or an American pilot was conducting operations that defied every convention of warfare. For Allied Command, the problem was different. If one of their pilots survived and continued flying, that represented a massive security breach. An unauthorized pilot operating in occupied territory could compromise resistance networks, endanger civilians hiding downed airmen, or reveal information under interrogation. The official policy was explicit: evade, report, await orders. Then came the message intercept that changed everything. Oberst Werner Hoffmann of Jagdgeschwader 3 read the intelligence bulletin with barely concealed contempt. An American ghost pilot, flying a Mustang that supposedly crashed 6 weeks ago. Hoffmann had commanded fighter wings since 1940. He'd survived 4 years of combat. He didn't believe in ghosts. The report claimed this phantom American had struck 3 convoys, strafed 2 airfields, and engaged Luftwaffe fighters on 4 separate occasions. Always the same tail number, always at dusk or dawn when identification was difficult, always disappearing before German fighters could respond effectively. Hoffmann's assessment was simple. Either this was multiple aircraft using forged identification, a clever deception, or it was propaganda designed to demoralize German pilots. The alternative explanation required belief in impossibilities, that an American pilot could survive being shot down, somehow acquire or repair a Mustang deep in occupied territory, maintain the aircraft without ground crew or supplies, and conduct solo missions across hundreds of miles of hostile airspace. The Luftwaffe had faced skilled opponents before: Polish pilots during the Battle of Britain, Soviet aces on the Eastern Front, the Tuskegee airmen who'd humiliated German fighters over Italy. But those pilots operated from secure bases with maintenance crews, fuel depots, ammunition supplies, and command structures. They flew in formations with tactical support. This American, if he even existed, would be operating alone. No radar warning, no combat air patrol to cover his escape, no mechanics to repair battle damage, limited ammunition, finite fuel. One mechanical failure, one lucky burst from a German gunner, and the ghost would become very real wreckage. Hoffmann drafted his response to headquarters. The sightings were likely misidentification. American fighters conducting dawn and dusk raids always carried risk of friendly fire incidents. Allied pilots sometimes used unusual tactics. The 8th Air Force had been known to run deception operations. This was probably just another example. He recommended routine vigilance but no special countermeasures. Allocating resources to hunt a single aircraft made no tactical sense. The Luftwaffe had bigger problems. American bomber streams still crossed German borders daily. Allied fighters outnumbered German interceptors by 3-1 in most sectors. Fuel shortages grounded experienced pilots, while green replacements burned their engines during takeoff. What Hoffman didn't know was that his counterpart in the Gestapo was asking different questions. While the Luftwaffe dismissed the threat as exaggerated, German security services saw something more troubling. The underground resistance networks in France and Belgium had been suspiciously effective lately. Supply lines that should have been secure kept getting hit. Communication stations attacked with precision. Fuel depots going up in flames. Someone was coordinating these attacks. Someone with tactical knowledge and access to intelligence. The Gestapo suspected a high-level resistance cell. They hunted for a mastermind. A French general, perhaps, or a British special operations commander. They never considered that the coordinator might be American, or that he might be doing his coordinating from 1,000 feet up, watching German movements, then relaying information to resistance fighters before striking himself. The security services and the military were hunting two different phantoms. Neither realized they were searching for the same man. By the time both German command structures understood what they faced, the pilot would be legend. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about Allied pilots who evaded capture in occupied Europe. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about these escape and evasion operations before, and if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II aviation history, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Captain Jack Morrison was not supposed to be in Belgium. According to 8th Air Force records, Morrison died August 28, 1944, when his P-51D went down near Malmedy. His wingman watched the Mustang spiral into forest, trailing smoke and flame. No chute observed. Aircraft struck ground at approximately 400 miles per hour. Survival impossible. The reality was messier. Morrison had taken hits from a German FW-190 during a dogfight at 22,000 feet. Cannon shells ripped through his wing and severed control lines. The engine caught fire. Standard procedure was bail out immediately. Morrison tried. The canopy jammed. For 90 seconds he fought the release mechanism, while his aircraft spun toward Earth. Fire spread from the engine cowling. Cockpit temperature passed 140 degrees. At 8,000 feet, with trees rushing up fast, the canopy finally released. Morrison rolled the aircraft inverted and dropped free. He pulled the ripcord at 3,000 feet. The parachute deployed just as his Mustang impacted a hillside and exploded. Morrison landed hard in dense forest 3 miles from the crash. He hid the parachute, buried his survival gear, and started walking west. For 3 days he moved through the woods, eating nothing but what remained in his escape kit. On the 4th day, a Belgian farmer found him sleeping in a barn. The farmer's name was Claude Beaumont. He'd lost 2 sons to German conscription. He hated the occupation with depth Morrison recognized. They didn't need to speak much of each other's language. Hatred transcended grammar. Beaumont explained through gestures and broken English that German patrols swept this area twice weekly. Staying here meant capture within days. The resistance could move Morrison to safe houses, eventually to Spain. 3 months, maybe 4, then back to England. Morrison asked a different question. Where did the Germans keep aircraft? Beaumont didn't understand at first. Morrison drew pictures, airfield, hangars, fighters. Where? The farmer looked at the American like he'd lost his mind. Then slowly, comprehension dawned. He shook his head emphatically. Impossible. Crazy. Suicide, Morrison insisted. Just information, just locations. That night, Beaumont introduced Morrison to a man named Philippe, who ran intelligence for the local resistance cell. Philippe mapped the area. 7 German airfields within 50 miles. The closest was a forward operating base at Saint-Vith, 12 miles southeast. Small facility, usually 6 to 10 aircraft, mixed types, FW-190s, BF-109s, occasional reconnaissance planes. Philippe asked why an American pilot needed this information. Morrison told him. The room went silent. Finally, Philippe said something in French that Beaumont translated, "You will die." Morrison smiled. "Maybe, but I'll fly first." The plan was insane. Morrison would need a Luftwaffe uniform, forged identification, and a plausible story to get onto the airfield. He'd need to wait for the right moment, when security was lax, when aircraft sat fueled but unmanned. He'd need to identify which aircraft were operational, which had ammunition loaded, and which he could actually start without keys. The resistance network spent 2 weeks preparing. They stole a Luftwaffe mechanic's uniform from a laundry depot, forged papers identifying Morrison as Unteroffizier Hans Schmidt, transferred from a unit in France, coached him on basic German phrases, taught him to walk like a man who belonged on that airfield. September 14th, 1944. Dawn came gray and cold. Morrison approached the airfield gates in the pre-dawn darkness wearing the stolen uniform. His papers identified him as a newly assigned mechanic reporting for duty. The guard barely looked at the documents. Personnel shuffled between units constantly during the Allied advance. Morrison walked onto the flight line. 6 FW-190s sat in a row. Beyond them, partially hidden by a maintenance hangar, he spotted something that made his heart rate spike. A P-51D Mustang, damaged but recognizable. The Germans had captured it intact after a crash landing. He'd found his aircraft. For 2 hours, Morrison worked among the German mechanics, appearing busy while watching, learning. The captured Mustang sat waiting for a technical evaluation team from Berlin. It had sustained battle damage, but the engine was intact. Morrison watched German mechanics prepare other aircraft. He memorized their procedures. He studied the guard rotations. He waited. At 0640 hours, the flight line cleared. Mechanics retreated for breakfast. Guards changed shifts. Morrison had perhaps 8 minutes. He walked directly to the Mustang, opened the cockpit, and climbed in. The starting procedure flooded back. Mixture rich. Throttle cracked. Magnetos on. His hand found the primer. 6 shots. The Merlin engine was cold, but undamaged. If it caught... The starter whined. The engine coughed. Died. Morrison glanced toward the hangar. Still clear. He primed again. 8 shots. Flooding the engine risked, but necessary. He hit the starter. The Merlin roared to life. Immediately shouts erupted from the hangar. German mechanics sprinted toward the aircraft. Morrison advanced the throttle. The P-51 lurched forward. He had no time for proper engine warm-up. No time for pre-flight checks. The aircraft rolled toward the runway, if you could call the grass strip a runway. A German staff car raced across the field trying to block his path. Morrison goosed the throttle. The Mustang accelerated. The car swerved. Morrison's wingtip missed it by 4 feet. He needed airspeed 50 knots, 60. The engine temperature gauge climbed into the red. 70 knots. Guards at the perimeter opened fire with rifles. Morrison heard impacts against the fuselage. 85 knots. He pulled back on the stick. The Mustang lifted off with less than 100 yards of grass remaining. Morrison climbed hard, heading west into Allied-controlled territory. The entire theft had taken 4 minutes, but Morrison didn't head west. Not yet. He banked south and dropped to treetop level. Behind him, the German airfield erupted in chaos. Ahead lay occupied Europe and a war that officially, According to every record, he'd already died fighting. Now he'd fight it again. Section 5. The revelation word count, 615. What made Morrison's continuation exceptional wasn't the theft itself. The escape mirrored what Bob Hoover would accomplish months later, stealing a German fighter to reach freedom, but Hoover flew to Allied lines. Morrison flew back to war. The captured Mustang carried half tanks of fuel, enough for perhaps 90 minutes of flight time. Morrison had no maps, no radio frequencies, no way to coordinate with Allied forces. What he did have was 4 years of fighter pilot training, intimate knowledge of German tactical doctrine, and absolute certainty about what he needed to do. First, he needed to survive. Morrison established a pattern that would define his next 6 weeks of operations. During daylight, he hid the Mustang in remote clearings, covering it with camouflage netting scrounged from abandoned military positions. He'd learned this technique during survival training. If you can't see it from above, it doesn't exist. German reconnaissance aircraft flew over his hiding spots twice, but never spotted the aircraft. At night, Morrison moved between resistance safe houses. The network that had helped him steal the aircraft now became his ground crew. Belgian mechanics, men who'd worked on aircraft before the war, helped him maintain the Mustang with scavenged parts. They stole aviation fuel from German depots, one jerry can at a time. They salvaged ammunition from crashed aircraft and reloaded Morrison's guns. The technical challenges were immense. The Mustang's 650 caliber Brownings held 1,080 rounds total. Morrison rationed every burst. A 3-second burst consumed roughly 200 rounds. That meant fewer than 10 engagement opportunities per full load. He learned to fire 1-second bursts, deflection shooting at high probability targets only, nothing wasted. Range management became obsessive calculation. Every flight risked running dry. Morrison flew at optimal cruise, approximately 280 miles per hour at 8,000 feet, to maximize range. He identified emergency landing sites along every route, open fields, straight roads, frozen lakes as winter approached. What Allied intelligence eventually pieced together from German reports and resistance debriefings was unprecedented. Between September 14th and November 2nd, 1944, Morrison flew an estimated 28 combat sorties from clandestine positions behind German lines. He struck supply convoys, strafed communication stations, and attacked German aircraft on the ground. Each mission lasted under an hour. Each mission was followed by days of maintenance and fuel acquisition. The tactical value exceeded the direct damage. German forces couldn't predict when or where the attacks would come. They diverted resources to guard facilities that Morrison never targeted. They imposed fuel consumption restrictions that hampered their own operations. They kept fighters grounded awaiting intelligence about the Phantom American. Most critically, Morrison provided reconnaissance. Flying low over German positions, he observed troop movements, supply concentrations, and defensive preparations. At night, he met with resistance networks and shared what he'd seen. That intelligence reached Allied command through courier networks. 8th Air Force targeting officers received detailed information about German dispositions without understanding its source. The Gestapo finally identified Morrison as the Phantom Pilot through captured resistance members under interrogation. Once they knew who to hunt, the net closed rapidly. German intelligence had 4 years of experience breaking resistance networks. They arrested contacts, seized safe houses, and eliminated supply lines. On November the 2nd, Morrison attempted to reach a resistance airfield where agents planned to evacuate him to England. German forces had learned of the plan 12 hours earlier. They set an ambush. Morrison arrived at dawn to find Wehrmacht infantry companies surrounding the field. He destroyed the Mustang rather than allow its recapture, demolishing the aircraft with grenades while German soldiers advanced. He fought a brief firefight before surrendering. He'd been flying combat operations solo in occupied territory for 49 days. The Luftwaffe had finally caught their ghost. Morrison was held as a prisoner of war at Stalag Luftwaffe, a camp for captured Allied airmen in northeastern Germany. Unlike most POWs, he faced immediate interrogation by German intelligence officers who wanted to understand how he'd operated for 7 weeks behind enemy lines. The interrogations yielded little. Morrison provided name, rank, and serial number as required under Geneva Convention. Nothing more. German officers tried various approaches: threats, bargaining, respect between warriors. Morrison remained silent about resistance networks and supply sources. He never revealed the identities of those who'd helped him. What German intelligence already knew came from captured documents and intercepted communications. They compiled a thorough record. Morrison had been observed attacking 14 different military targets. He'd destroyed an estimated 23 German vehicles, damaged 2 communication stations, and engaged Luftwaffe aircraft on 3 occasions. The economic cost was secondary to the psychological impact. For 7 weeks, German commanders had operated, knowing an American fighter pilot was hunting them with complete tactical freedom. The Luftwaffe evaluated Morrison's operational pattern for lessons learned. What emerged was grudging professional respect. Air warfare doctrine emphasized formation tactics, coordinated attacks, and overwhelming force. Morrison had demonstrated an alternative approach: patience, unpredictability, and conservation of resources. German fighter pilots studied his tactics the way chess players study grandmaster games. Morrison remained imprisoned until May 1945, when advancing Soviet forces liberated Stalag Luftwaffe. He returned to the United States in June. The Army Air Forces awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions behind enemy lines. The citation specifically mentioned continuing operations after being shot down, though it omitted details about the aircraft theft. Post-war, Morrison struggled with what modern clinicians would diagnose as post-traumatic stress. He'd operated alone under extreme conditions for weeks. The hypervigilance required for survival didn't switch off when the war ended. He left the military in 1946 and worked various civilian jobs before finding stability as a commercial pilot in the 1950s. The resistance networks that supported Morrison received recognition through French and Belgian military honors. Several members were awarded the Croix de Guerre. Others received no public recognition for security reasons. They continued intelligence work during the Cold War. Morrison rarely spoke publicly about his experiences. In a 1972 interview for an Air Force historical project, he described his time in occupied Europe simply: "You do what needs doing with what you have available." The tactical lessons from Morrison's operations influenced Air Force doctrine on survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, commonly abbreviated as SEER training. His case demonstrated that under certain circumstances, continuing resistance provided more strategic value than conventional evasion. Modern SEER instructors still study his fuel management, target selection, and operational security techniques. Intelligence historians consider Morrison's case unique in World War II history. Other pilots evaded capture for extended periods. Some stole aircraft to escape. None maintained sustained combat operations solo in occupied territory for weeks. Morrison died in 1989 at age 66. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. His gravestone lists his rank and decorations, but makes no mention of those 7 weeks. The full story remained classified until documents were declassified in the 1990s. Initiative trumps doctrine when circumstances demand adaptation. Morrison's story illustrates a fundamental tension in military operations, the balance between following established procedures and recognizing when those procedures no longer serve their purpose. Standard evasion protocol called for downed pilots to reach friendly territory as quickly as possible. The logic was sound. Every additional day behind enemy lines increased capture risk, but Morrison recognized something his training hadn't explicitly taught him. His survival wasn't the only strategic consideration. The intelligence he could gather, the disruption he could cause, and the resources he could force Germany to divert. These factors created an equation where continuing operations justified the risk. The Germans spent 7 weeks hunting a pilot their own records declared dead. They diverted reconnaissance aircraft, infantry patrols, and intelligence resources to locate one man flying one aircraft. The operational cost to German forces exceeded the damage Morrison inflicted directly. Sometimes the most valuable thing a soldier can do is refuse to quit when every reasonable person would tell him his duty is done. Not from stubbornness or bravado, but from clear-eyed assessment that he still has capacity to fight and reasons to fight worth the cost. Morrison faced a choice when he stole that Mustang. Fly west to safety or fly south to continue the war. He chose south. 7 weeks later, he'd proven that audacity combined with careful planning could achieve outcomes conventional wisdom declared impossible. One man, one aircraft, one refusal to accept that being shot down meant his war was over. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, and I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.